The questions log. Week 16. You might never know it from the windowless shipping container Montoya and I have made our home since last week's prison break. But it's wedding season in Kondak. My protege explores Saruta under laborious nationwide party planning to crack the intergang mystery as I remain inside, taming the rats. Sometimes wish I could give her more of a hand. But it's important she sees this part through on her own, like a child opening her first can of beans. That's right. Judge all you like. You can't cancel me in any way that matters. This is 52 Pickup.
Hello and welcome to 52 Pickup, a podcast about the greatest comic book that you've never heard of. I am Gita. As always, I'm just Gita, and I'm joined by my co-host, Alex Jaffe. What's up?
That's me. I'm professional comic book expert Alex Jaffe. So nice to see your beautiful Punim today. How have you been?
Oh, I've been surviving. I'm very tired and I have work to do after this recording, so I'm kind of thinking about that, but you guys don't want to hear about API documentation or whatever.
Maybe it's fascinating.
It's not. I promise you it isn't. Much, much more interestingly, though, we have a guest, one of my lovely, wonderful friends. I'm so privileged to be able to call this person a friend. We have the incredible, the inimitable, the prolific, and the opinionated Charles Pulliam-Moore.
Hi Gita.
Hi, friend.
How you doing?
I'm doing all right. I'm admiring the shelf behind you and all your Pokeballs. That Master Ball is incredibly cool.
All my Pokeballs and, one of my teams watching over me while I work.
Oh my god, they're keeping you safe.
Yeah. Who's your starter, Charles?
My starter, in my heart of hearts, starter. I think Pikachu is the starter, right?
Yeah.
Like, Yellow was, like, one of my first big, the game is, like, a little different kind of experiences, and we're trying to give you something that's, molding, like blending your love of the game and the TV show together. And in my mind, it was also sort of like a canon breaking thing, because it was like, no. Don't worry about water and fire and grass. Like, you can have an electric type if you want. Like, take this Pikachu. It's your starter. And you can catch all the other ones. So in my mind, like, Pikachu has always kind of been like the starter in my heart.
So it's like your baby.
Yeah.
Good luck on that first rock gym, Pikachu.
Look, it builds character.
That's how we know you're black. This is how you know.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like we all remember Ash beating Brock by turning on the fire sprinklers at the gym and then electrocuting Onyx, and it was like,
that's true.
Underhanded, okay. Yes.
Very underhanded, very dirty, and we love it.
Yes, absolutely.
Gita, do you have a heart starter?
God, okay. Well, I mean, I'm a noted Eevee head, but if we're going to go by accepted canon starters, like not just from Let's Go Eevee and Let's Go Pikachu, honestly, the leaf type that's a cat in one of the more recent games is really cute. Oh my god, they got little beans. They got a little leaf coming. I'm a sucker for grass types, and I don't even really like grass types a lot, but the designs are always really, really cute, I think. I just think plants are cute, and they always have little flowers on them. But if you give me a Pokemon that's basically a cat, I'm going to love it forever. Sorry.
Well, I've always been Squirtle Squad, day one. So
yes,
that's what diversity
right.
is.
Day one Squirtle Squad. That makes sense for you, I think.
Yeah.
I feel like it's like zodiac signs, where you can learn a lot about a person through their preferred starter.
Yeah.
Oof, yeah.
You hear I'm a Squirtle guy, and you're like, of course he's a Squirtle guy.
And then you have to, I need to hear, like, your favorite 3 generations, and then the starters that you would pick from it. Like, I need to be able to get your moon, your sun, and your rising at the same time to get, like, a full picture.
I love Unova, because I'm New York till I die.
Of course. Unova, I mean, Black and White was a whole moment. We'll just say that.
I missed Black and White when they came out. Like, I had just sort of not fallen, you go through those fallow phases where you're just kind of like not quite as tuned into Pokemon or like games in general. And I like drifted away from Pokemon and came back for Sun and Moon, but so much time had passed that I never went back to sort of figure out what Black and White was all about. Bought it last fall, just on a whim while I was in Toronto, and was like, oh shit, like this is Diamond and Pearl were fine, but like this was the moment for DS Pokemon gaming.
They were cooking with that one. They were like, oh my god, adults. play this
So
game?
what? A whole little samurai otter. Just like, yeah, he looks like the Jack in the Box
He does.
guy.
He looks like the Jack in the Box guy.
All the better. All the better.
I need you to get in that Diamond and Pearl mindset because those games came out in 2006. And
Oof.
that's what was happening when 52, the comic we're here to talk about
Oh
today.
my God, a segue. He's a podcast professional.
This is a Gen 4
That's
comic.
flawless.
Absolutely. We love it. We love to see it. Alex Jaffe, what a pal.
Charles, what were you doing in the comics world around 2006? Were you reading anything?
Oh, I was definitely reading things. They were not DC things, unfortunately. I've always been a Marvel kid at heart, and at this particular moment in comics nonsense, I was very wrapped up in Civil War because it was sort of like the big Marvel,
Oh, yes.
to-do going on, and it was almost. I look back on it and barely recognize myself, but it's like that for me was that moment where it's kind of like when events are happening, you kind of have a responsibility to be at least marginally invested so that,
Yeah, you got to read the comics like a newspaper.
But yeah, yes. And it's like the girls are fighting,
They certainly were, yes.
This was before it had come into parlance, but that was sort of like my comics work as, a teenager. But what I was reading for like fun, I was really sort of into trades of New X-Men. This series that gave us Prodigy and Elixir and Surge. Like that was sort of, a lot of Marvel comics had just sort of been in my general atmosphere growing up. But I feel like everyone has that moment where your appreciation for media sort of crystallizes and matures for you to be able to start making your own like foundational relationships with something that's kind of apart from what you hear other people saying is important. And for me, that was, New X-Men. And I was like, oh, like, I respect Gene and Scott and all of them, but like, these are my kids. Like, these are my peers. And I'm very sort of, I want to know what's going on with them.
New X-Men was one of the first books that I devoted like an entire, like just sat down and read the entire run,
Correct.
It is, I mean, for a very long time, my Twitter, the display name was just Emma Frost. Because of New X-Men, coincidentally also written by, I'm assuming you're talking about the Grant Morrison run.
No, I'm specifically talking about, let me look, I have their names written right. I'm talking about the Nunzio De Philippis and Christina Weir series. That sort of introduced like a new younger generation of mutants who were coming to the Xavier School. And it was at the whole comic was clearly like a ploy to get young people into the X books.
Yes. This was the book that followed the Grant Morrison run.
Yes.
And at that point, Morrison had moved on to, obviously, working for DC.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They were working on 52 literally at that time.
Yeah, exactly.
But it was just, Morrison had done so much to sort of really hammer home the extent to which Emma is a teacher first and a superhero second, right?
Mm-hmm.
And New X-Men really sort of explored that. It was really interesting to sort of see Emma putting her money where her mouth was.
Yes.
It wasn't the first been a teacher like that, but it was so fascinating to sort of see her interacting with a whole new crop of new people, sort of coming off of her loss of the Hellions and this understanding that in order for her to really sort of find herself again, she would need to sort of situate herself in an educational environment and really focus on cultivating the next generation of mutants. So I was in high school, they were in high school. I was like, hell fucking yeah, let's go. In the way that all comics nerds are, like you know what the other folks are kind of talking about, sort of. And I knew I'd always associated the word crisis with DC because it's sort of like, oh, that's one of your things.
Sort of a calling card at this point of the big events. They try to cram crisis in there if they can. Yeah.
Sure. You got wars, we got crisis.
Yeah. And you know what? I like that for us. I like that for us all. But like, I've never had like the deepest emotional connection to a lot of DC characters. And whenever I would sort of pick up a random DC comic just to sort of like browse through it in a comic shop, I couldn't articulate this then, but going back and reading 52 now, I realized that I think that what a lot of big DC events and smaller events sort of really rely on is not an assumption, but the understanding that a lot of DC fans hold a very specific set of DC stories close to their hearts. Mm-hmm. And there's a way that the brand has been very successful to varying degrees, playing into that in one way or another and exploring it from different angles using different characters. But if you don't have a very strong foundational connection to, say, Superboy, Infinite Crisis just doesn't mean as much, right? It's just, well, why is he so mad? Yes, your Earth was destroyed. That's very tragic. But why are you fighting yourself? He's not even evil.
Yeah, I mean, I think you definitely see that. We had a text conversation, and I know Jaffe and I have talked extensively about Geoff Johns. Geoff Johns, what's going on? What's going on, Geoff Johns? You can see it especially looking forward into the future with the way that he's interacting with Watchmen and the way that he is trying to canonize that as one of the quote-unquote like important DC stories that is essential to the fabric of the universe. And it's got like limiting returns, right? I feel like in 52, a lot of things work. One, because you're not dealing with the big three. So you don't have to get wrapped up into the baggage of their specific histories. It's a little bit more accessible because you might just remember Renee Montoya from the cartoon. And then you're just like, oh, I know her.
Right.
I think everything you need to know about Geoff Johns comes from the fact that back in the 90s Superboy run, he wrote into the mailbag to share his theory about how he thought, what if Superboy was half Superman and half Lex Luthor? And the editor of the magazine soundly mocked him for that. So he spent the next 10 years working through the industry until he could get to the point where he could make that canon. So that's basically Geoff Johns' entire character. If you want to know what Superboy Prime was doing in Infinite Crisis, literally punching reality into the shape he wanted, it's a little bit of a semi-autobiography.
I love that one of like the great semi-textual examples of on-page queerness in DC Comics is just the end result of Spite that began with a fan letter.
Oh,
it's so true.
Because I wasn't really paying attention to DC books when that became a part of Connor's, story. Like, and you see it now. He refers to Lex as his father, and other people will refer to both Lex and Clark as his fathers in a very sort of casual sort of, this is just what it is, right? And it's very kind of, it's weird, not weirdly, but it's very progressive for, I feel like, a brand that to me, growing up, never particularly read as like, oh, this is the narrative ground that's really fertile for a kind of transgressive queerness.
You can see how it sets up the runway for bisexual Tim Drake and gay Superboy son or non, attracted to men Superboy son. And
was also
Batwoman,
born from spite.
Yeah.
Exactly. Sincerely, you see that in this book very much. And it's a lot. I mean, I think what's really interesting about comics as a medium is that it is one of the ways in which you can very much visually see your specific read on a character or your dreams for that character come true in front of your eyes. It's like winning a ship war. Like if you won a ship war in fandom and then you got to make your ship be the one true pairing for that fandom. It's like if like Edward fans and Jacob fans.
Canon is a battlefield.
Yeah, if they like beat each other's ass until one of them won, it's what it feels like. I think that's really fascinating, and specifically when it comes to this book, because it might, like, there's aspects of it, this issue especially, that feels so fan fiction-y, but it also feels so triumphant because it's just like, we're making this happen whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
Oh boy, yeah. We have a lot to get into, speaking of like creator intentions. One thing I've really been looking forward to getting into in this issue is the fact that this issue number 16, is Greg Rucka's greatest regret. The one that haunted him for years afterwards. And once we get to the end, I will explain why. But just keep that in mind as we get through this issue.
I'm very intrigued now.
Yeah. I'm excited to talk about the post 9/11 politics of it all when it comes to.
Oh God, yes.
Oh my God, yeah. There's a lot.
That's not even the part he regrets.
Oh my God, I can't believe it. I mean, I should believe it, right? I should believe it. It's a big issue. I can't pronounce the name of the title for this, so Jaffe, I was relying on you because it's a bunch of I can't read it.
It looks like Uhebbuki. I looked at is a bad transliteration of the Arabic phrase for I love you.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was really loud. I heard it echo in my own headphones. But wow, I wish that they had had a better transliteration, because it feels like the first time that the comic itself acknowledges that where these people are geographically in the culture and history that they're bringing here, which it's so like there's so much subtext and so little text when it comes to that. That's fascinating.
Yeah. There are little touches of that in this issue. Like later we'll see that Isis talks about the moon with male pronouns, which is very much an Arabic thing.
I had no idea. That's
cool.
Yeah.
I totally did not pick up on that.
Yeah, no, I didn't pick up on that at all. I'm happy.
I love that.
Yeah, I'm happy always to see that written into these characters, because her name is Adriana Tomas. You know? It's sort of just Adriana Tomas. Like, I feel like I've met her at an Air Juan in Los Angeles.
I didn't want to like jump the shark, but like you guys have seen the Power of Isis TV show.
Alex has seen it. I have not seen it.
I have seen every episode of the Power of Isis TV show to prepare for this show.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Oh, zephyr winds which blow on high, lift me now so I can fly.
Actually, that's what I say every time I enter a room. Just so you guys know.
Yeah.
She was a character that I was just vaguely familiar with growing up, just having been a voracious consumer of a lot of old television. And I just never really understood that character as existing as a part of like the DC brand. It was always just sort of a camp moment from the 70s, like in my mind. Again, because it's like, I feel like when you're attuned to DC, you see it everywhere, right?
Yes.
You're just
No,
like,
that's true.
like this is that, like, and that's this. And like, hey, my dad, Superman is here. I feel safe. Whereas
that is how I feel. Don't call me out.
The funny thing about that, yes, A, Superman is my dad. But B, Isis wasn't a DC character until this series. What happened was Filmation developed the Isis show so they would have something to fill the back half hour after the Shazam show. And that's how the two became related. And then during this whole period, Jeff was like, we need more Arabic characters in our comics. And he's like, what about Isis? And he got clearance for that.
It would be different now, I would say.
Yes.
This character would have a different... I know it's not the fault of the Egyptian goddess Isis, but there is now just... We've talked about this. Anyone who's listening to this in sequence will listen to us crack up about this every single episode. But it's hard to talk about the things Isis thinks, says, does, or believes.
As we do every time we talk about Jeff Johns and his quest for Arabic representation and the way he writes Kondak, I feel like I do need to remind people that he is Lebanese, so it's not a white guy doing this. Just like, let's keep that in mind.
Yeah, no, let's definitely keep that in mind.
Yeah.
But it is... I think it's a problem. This is, okay, I hate saying representation matters, but let's talk about the issue of being the only person of a particular background within an organization. It means that you specifically have to rely on all of your specific knowledge. And what if you're not an expert? What if you only have your lived experience?
There is such a, despite, like, you can see, like, reading this issue, or reading through 52, you can see so much of Isis's arc being, from DC's perspective, a kind of, I don't want to call it a course correction, right? Because she wasn't their IP to begin with. But the thinking was, as we weave her into our lore and our canon, we need to do it in such a way that sort of makes her backstory and her power set more than just like a white woman in a costume, right? And so the intention there is to sort of try to, it's kind of like, I don't want to call it like the way that Marvel has gone about doing the Black Panther thing, but like let's make her essentially into an avatar of her culture, right? Like that is clearly the intention. But for all of the steps that Johns takes to sort of flesh Kondak out as a capital P place, that place is still so fundamentally just defined by a nondescript Middle Eastern otherness.
Yeah.
To fundamentally root Black Adam and by extension Isis, who everyone talks like, oh, like, no, Adriana's from Egypt, and like Isis is an Egyptian goddess, but in her being sort of bolted on to the what do they call them? The Black Captain Marvel family, it almost sort of weirdly strips her of a very particular kind of like Egyptian nuance, and then just turns her into like a flat brown hero who
Absolutely,
is so frequently depicted as like a weirdly like haughty kind of scary looking woman who you just looking at her, you're not like, I don't know that I'm meant to trust this woman exactly.
Yeah, no, I mean, we'll get into it as we go through the events of the issue, which just come from a post-Hurt Locker type space, I will say. There's a little bit of my girl Catherine all over this episode. But there is, what I've said in previous episodes, is like, it feels like a character that's written from an American perspective, even though she's supposed to be Egyptian, where she doesn't protest Black Adam killing people because murder is wrong, but because it's a threat to American hegemony. Like, it's something that she says, which is very, very weird.
The main thing she has a problem with is that he's consolidating superpowers from countries that aren't America.
Yeah.
You're building this coalition that makes me so uncomfortable. As an Egyptian national, I don't know why you're trying to challenge American hegemony so much. And it's just, I love the implication that she is a worldly and politically aware person, right? Like in this moment in which so much of the world is thrown into chaos, you know, Adriana is very like level-headed and sort of keeping a very clear-eyed read on the situation. But her clear-eyed read never really seems to be in service of her own motivations.
Yeah. She becomes like a bit of a cipher because, again, she's not allowed to have her character be developed outside of this comic book specifically, which has to deal with a bunch of different overlapping plots, which is one of the things that makes the book so satisfying. But it becomes just sort of like she's a mouthpiece for whatever is going to get Black Adam to do what the comic book demands, essentially. But let's start talking about the actual issue before we just talk about how weird it is. There's a lot of good in here, too, starting with the cover for this issue, which is simply incroyable. Oh my God. I love every single thing about this cover. I love the composition. I love the layers of symbolism. I love how it's colored. I love flowers all the time, everywhere. And
the Isis flower trail is very nice.
I just think it's one of those, it's not as like well known as the big magazine cover style 52 covers, but this is one of my personal favorites. It depicts the Question and Renee in the foreground, colored in shadow, doing some superhero type stuff. They're clearly bursting into action.
She's got her Jack Kirby gun. He's in his Tommy Lee Edwards coat from the 2005 Question mini. It's all very nice.
It is very nice. You could specifically cosplay this moment and it would be recognizable. And then in the background, which is highlighted by the sun, is a poster of Black Adam and Isis. And it's very much giving Obama hope a little bit, you know?
It is.
Yeah.
2 years early,
Yeah, precipitating that moment. It's clearly like political propaganda, but you can see like there's a composition here of the big spectacle and then what's happening behind the scenes. And I really like the way it's composed.
Yeah, maybe Dwayne Johnson isn't the only person whose brain was melted by this series.
Oh, God.
Wow.
I mean, I know why Isis couldn't have been in that film, and I know that Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson would never have allowed it. But the idea of doing a Black Adam movie based on stuff that happened in 52 and not having Isis feels really wild to me.
Yeah, they have a cipher for her. The same way that Legends of Tomorrow kind of had an Isis, but they had to change everything about the name so that she wasn't Isis. So it's a character people want to do stuff with. It's just the world took a turn that they can't do that right now. If we're talking talent, J.G. Jones and Alex Sinclair knock it out of the park on this cover. And they're going to be doing the backup later, too, for the first time, because that's going to be about Black Adam. And if you're going to get talent to talk about Black Adam, you might as well grab the talent from this series, because this is the Black Adam series. For the main book, we got Joe Bennett and Rui Jose back on pencils and inks, respectively. They're our main art team. So this is one of the core canon books, if you're going by artist, I suppose.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah.
That's where we're at.
That's where we're at. This issue it's another one where everything happens on like 2 days, essentially. But they're two really impactful days. We spend the entire issue, I believe, in Kahndaq. And we start off in a scene where Black Adam and Isis are just being sweet on each other, essentially.
Yeah.
It's just a long flirtation. In the previous issue, maybe 2 issues ago, they had begun to acknowledge their romantic feelings for each other. But they've had what is clearly a whirlwind romance, where here, Black Adam is showing off to Isis a beautiful garden that has been planted by the children that Isis saved.
The children they liberated from slave camps.
Yeah. And not only that, but Black Adam acknowledges, and the children acknowledge, this other, character motivation that Isis has, which is to find her brother. So you can see, it's not just an attempt to woo her, but Black Adam understands that she's a real human being with real desires and that he needs to sublimate himself to her a little bit. If any of these plot points had been given more room to breathe, this would have been the sweeping, epic romance of the century, truly. But unfortunately, by the nature of the comic, they all have to be super condensed.
Oh, yeah. And we'll get into that.
Yes.
I did create a little bit of a timeline so we could see how Black Adam's relationship with Isis has progressed through this series.
Please.
They first meet in week 3, which is when she's presented to him as a slave from Intergang. They have their first conversation 7 weeks later in week 10. They start working together in week 12. So this is a 4-week-old relationship, which is to say a week longer than it took my parents to meet and get married. So I say it passes the realism test.
Fair enough.
Question, did your parents watch either one another rip a person in half and then continue to do their courtship? Was it still...
No, but my dad did have to go to get medical school in Grenada, so that was trying.
Yeah. It's a different kind of struggle, I would say. Yeah. It's more of a positive sign about your father than the violence, but, to each their own. Yeah, so by the end of this interaction, Black Adam has proposed to Isis.
Yeah.
After 4 weeks.
That's where we are. And then we skip 5 days as the entire country gets ready for a royal wedding.
So we're taking the perspective, we don't see any of that setup, would be a great little montage, but perspective changes from day to day 6. We are going to be hanging out a little bit with Renee and the Question, who, after the kidnapping and assassination attempt last issue, are hiding out on the low. They're in a shipping container from Tot. I thought that was a cute detail, now that I know who Tot is. They're in a shipping container. They're being plagued by rats.
Tot was kind enough to send her gun in the crate, so they got around that plot hole.
Yeah, that is really nice. I like also that Vic Sage is meditating again here, though with his clothes on. Yeah. He usually, just so you know, it's canonical, Charles, that Vic Sage meditates naked for days at a time.
Is there a specific reason as to why he's naked?
It's his way of connecting with nature, I guess. It's a yogic practice.
Yeah. No, there's a little bit of Eastern mysticism, an aspect of that to the character, which, because of how old DC Comics is, comes up so frequently in DC. One of the major differences in DC than Marvel is the farther back you go, and it's not like there are not problematic character origins in Marvel, but the farther back you go with character origins in DC Comics, as we saw in some of the backup for Metamorpho, is the origin is so a guy went spelunking in Egypt and found a mystical artifact, stole it, and then some freaky shit happened to them.
Now he's our city's protector, and he's a great guy.
That's literally Isis's original origin,
Yeah. So Vic Sage, it's more technological, but because he's also a product of mystical ideas about selfhood, this Eastern mysticism also starts creeping in. And it makes sense also, again, to have him spent so much time in Kahndaq for that reason.
I love the playful banter between Vic and Renee here,
Always.
referring to the rats as the kids.
I love that they hate each other but have to cohabitate. I feel like that's the best state for Renee Montoya to be in
it's the
any
good
series.
Shit,
Yes, she just is really good at not liking someone and insulting them to their face.
Yeah.
Basically, I love that for her. But throughout this conversation, Renee has a realization. She's mostly concerned with getting the fuck out and not wanting to be in a hot, sweaty shipping container. But then she realizes that there's going to be a really big event with a lot of people there. And if they want to know what Intergang is getting up to, it probably has to do with the big royal wedding that's about to happen.
Right. And she picks up on a clue that was dropped a couple issues ago that we're going to get into in the next scene. But first, I believe we go to Isis getting ready for this wedding. And her her maid of honor is a woman she has never spoken to before today. I assume she has no other friends. Mary Marvel showing up in this series for the first time.
Mary Marvel, what is this dizzy bitch doing?
She is...
As weird as this is, I love this sequence so much. Because it is sort of absurd on its face, right?
Yeah.
Like, not knowing, I will fully cop to the bulk of my knowledge about the Shazam family coming from the Shazam films, because they are so of a time in comics that I have no direct connection to, that when I read the classic Shazam comics, it's like, oh no, this isn't for me. No.
He's a guy who likes egg creams. You know, you have to have a bit of a tolerance for that.
Yeah.
He wants a little bit of a sassafras, and he's gonna kick his stick across, people's lawn, or their fences, and it's just Billy Batson. I don't know you, but I will say that to see Mary Marvel just sort of popping up with Isis and being like, hey, so you're joining the family. Because for all of the new status quo that's all throughout 52, I do understand that Black Adam and Captain Marvel, Shazam, are diametrically opposed, right? And this, as sort of distasteful as sort of the political undertones of Black Adam's villainy are in this particular comic, I do read this sort of suspicion that everyone has of him as being genuine, right? You sort of do wonder to yourself, what is it that you're working towards, Black Adam? And to see Mary just pop up this way in what's meant to ostensibly be a funny moment, the absurdity of it works for me, because it is sort of, while Isis herself never sort of seems to, she specifically says oh, I've transformed back so many times. My feelings are genuine. I get that, the Isis transformation doesn't mean that the goddess's personality takes over you. But this whole story does always keep you wondering, are you thinking about this? Do you don't know this man. You don't know this man, but you do know that he's a violent murderer. Truly, he might turn on you, right? And for all of Mary's strangeness in this place, her questioning does feel sort of like an articulation of a feeling that I'm having as I'm reading it.
Yeah. There's one panel that made me crack up while I was reading this, and it's Mary Marvel's making an impassioned plea. Her body language is really giving please just listen to me for a second. Yeah. And she says, he's psychotic. And Isis responds from off screen, he's driven. And then she responds, he's killed a lot of people. And I could post that to Tumblr tomorrow, and people would be like, same.
Yeah, I'm a little bit obsessed with this panel.
I do appreciate it's only strange, I think, in that it feels weird. Again, it just feels weird for the character of Isis as a long-term aspect of, we're introducing this new character that's related to Black Adam into what is a huge tapestry of characters that some of them might get picked up and played with and some of them might not. It's just weird that she doesn't know anybody she would want to have in this room instead. But I love Mary Marvel, and I'm never going to be mad about Mary Marvel showing up. I don't really know any, like Charles, I'm very similar in that I when I look at a Shazam, a Captain Marvel Shazam book, I'm a little bit I just am not a white person that was born in 1946. I'm just not. I don't know.
What if you and your best friend and your sister were superheroes? I don't know, bro. What if?
What? It's crazy. Yeah. But I do love Mary. I feel like Mary's writing has always tried to maintain, because she's a teenager in both her superpowered forms and as a regular person, she has to have this sort of spunky go-getter-ishness that a teenager from the 1950s would have. So she's always trying to be a little bit, provocative, not in a sexual way, but just sort of she was a teen when the idea of it being a teenager was invented. So she's going to embody all of the ideas of being a teenage girl. And that includes making sure your girlfriend is not marrying a murderer.
Mary Marvel was the first teen female superhero to have her own comic book.
That's fucking
decades
cool.
before anybody else.
I had no idea.
She's the original teen girl superhero.
Oh my god.
I think it's really cool that Josie Campbell, the showrunner for My Adventures with Superman, is the one who's writing Mary Marvel and Billy right now. I think that's a great match.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So she's really able to capture that particular energy in a way I'm really enjoying in the comics right now. So these characters are still out there doing the thing 12 years later.
I feel like every time she shows up, I just feel like everyone understands the brief when it comes to Mary Marvel, and that she's just an all-American teenage girl. And that will take many different forms throughout the ages, but she has to be a representative of what it means to be like a teenage girl, like a confident teenage girl, not one that is, because she's also given the power of the god, she can't be like a girl that goes to Euphoria High School, you know?
I know it's been more than 12 years, don't at me. We go to the boys this time. Next, we go across the palace to see what Black Adam's doing to get ready with his best man, his best pal, Captain Marvel. Those two famous friends.
I do like the little conversation that Captain Marvel and Black Adam have about his hairline.
Yes. I mean, the entire time they were talking about Black Adam's hairline, all I could think about was Vegeta and Bulma. Like that had to be exactly the conversation they were having at their wedding.
So real.
See, you saying that, like, that totally scans, right? Like, I definitely get Vegeta to a certain extent from Black Adam, and I can see a Bulma-ness in Isis. But in this case, Billy isn't Goku the adult. He's Goku the, like, whenever I see Goku, whenever I see Shazam on the page, I struggle when I'm meant to take Shazam seriously as an adult-bodied person who sort of speaks with a kind of sageness of an adult. Like, I understand that there's the wisdom aspect to his powers, but the degree to which that sort of guides what he's actually saying always just really sort of feels circumstantial. It's hard, and it's based on what, like, the writer wants in that moment. In, like, when he's talking to Adam, like, they're joking about the bloodstain that he can't get out of his cape. I'm thinking to myself, like, what is the energy here exactly? What is, are you still concerned about the coalition? Are you genuinely thinking about the degrees to which, like, going through with this might all just sort of be a ploy, or are we all just having fun?
Yeah. Are you three kids in a trench coat, or are you an adult man is the big question here. Jaffe, let's throw this over to you, though, because you know so much more about this character than I do.
Sure.
Is there, like, when we see Shazam, are we supposed to regard him as an adult that Billy is sort of allowing to pilot around, or is that a specific, explicitly different character from Billy Batson?
Gita, that's an excellent question. Throughout the entire history of Captain Marvel / Shazam, the answer to that has been consistently changing.
I had a feeling. Yeah,
classically, it's a little bit like Billy and Captain Marvel are kind of two different personalities that share the same body.
Okay.
But after the 1980s, it kind of went back and forth, especially with Keith Giffen and James DeMatteis's Justice League International, that they kind of made it a sort of big situation, that it was a kid in a big adult body, which is what the Shazam movies kind of drew on. But the idea of who Billy Batson is that he's kind of classically been less like a troublemaking kid and more like a Steven Universe type.
Mm-hmm. A perfect little boy who's never done anything wrong.
Yes.
Yeah.
He's very concerned with love and understanding and compassion and finding the right way to do everything. He's not a Bart Simpson. Mm-hmm. And we find him in this series in particular at a very tough crossroads in his life, something that we saw a few issues earlier when he was struggling with juggling all the sins in the Rock of Eternity, that in the fallout of one of the tie-ins to Infinite Crisis, Day of Vengeance, the Wizard Shazam was killed, which meant there was no one left at the Rock of Eternity to, like, manage all of the sins of man of getting out of control. So it had to be Billy who stepped up and took this. So Billy trying to act like an adult and an authority figure in this issue is very much representative of where he is as a character in his personal arc. He's trying to live up to that leadership role. He's not going to be able to hold it for long, but this is him trying his best to hold it together because he believes that Black Adam can change and be different.
It's like, have you ever walked into a work situation where everyone is behaving like they're in high school and you're clearly the most mature person in the room? Charles, I know you have, which is why you're smiling to me.
I'm not smiling.
It's just, I feel like I've been there. I understand this where you're like, I'm 12 and what is this? And like everyone else, for some reason, just does not have their shit together and it has to be you. It is.
Exactly. That's Billy here. He's stepping up.
It's a tough position to be in, for sure. And you can see, I love this one illustration of Billy Batson's face in the corner here, or Captain Marvel's face, where he's facing away from the camera, and there's this look on his face that doesn't just seem like tired or stressed, but like world weary. Like he has just been speed running adulthood and all of the issues of mankind alone in a cave somewhere.
Dude is going through this. Right. I mean, as we've established in previous episodes, Joe Bennett is a piece of shit, but he really does capture the anguish of Billy Batson in this particular point in his arc.
Yeah, it's too bad he's a real piece of shit.
Yeah.
But I do think the faces are pretty great this issue, especially, I mean, it's specifically important here because it's about a wedding and you want to see love on people's faces. Mm-hmm. You want to understand that they know what they're doing here, which is having an eternal bond. You know, I got married last year and we're planning our honeymoon. So I'm thinking about it a lot. We're going to Italy soon. Anyway.
Molto bene.
That's what I've been saying. Molto bene. But all is not well in Kondak. There are other furtive conversations to be had. And as we go into the next scene, we rejoin Renee and Vic Sage as they disguise themselves and try to figure out what Intergang is going to get up to at this wedding.
Right. Renee picks up on the fact that when they stumbled on that crime scene with all those dead bodies a couple weeks ago before they were arrested, they were examining those rat poison boxes. And that was the clue. That it turns out bombers use rat poison as an anticoagulant. So she should have figured out that they were planning a bombing.
Yeah, I guess she should have.
Yeah.
It's such a specific note. This is what I mean by like the post-Hurt Locker of it all.
Yeah.
Or it's just, it's not like the Hurt Locker was a bad film. It was definitely a good film, but it is just from the perspective of someone who's drank the Kool-Aid when it comes to American intelligence and American military.
Yeah.
This strikes me as the kind of thing that if I had read it in the moment, it's something that wouldn't have made sense at the moment, but it would have just like stuck in my mind as a weird thing that I would have looked up like 3 years later and then become low-key obsessed with in a way that wasn't wholly healthy.
Yeah, because it's something that it might be true, right? Like rat poison is an anticoagulant. So I understand how it could be true that people who are attempting suicide bomb attacks would use them, as Renee says, to ensure that people who are hit by shrapnel, even if they aren't hit in a vital organ, they bleed to death. But it's also, you can see how it's a way for, say, a governing body of a foreign power to put a sanction on essential goods like rat poison in order to assert control over that region. And here we're just meant to take it at face value, you know? Yeah. It's I went to an art exhibit a while ago at MoMA PS1 that was called Theaters of Operation, which was about the Gulf War and the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. And one of the things that they pointed out was that the sanctions were so severe that artists couldn't get notebooks there. Like paper and pencils could be considered tools of terrorists. You know, this is like a really interesting little slice of how you can manufacture consent even if you are not aware that you're doing that.
Right.
It is a thrilling issue, right? It's a great issue. It's a great little twist to the mystery, and it's a great clue to plant if you're trying to figure out a little plot.
It's just grounded in the very biased rhetoric of the time.
Yes. It's like watching 24, you know?
Sure.
Charles, have you ever seen 24?
I have watched plenty of 24, and it was the kind of thing that was just on in my house a lot, but I never really could lock into. Kiefer Sutherland just doesn't pull me into the screen. Donald, though, I think that whenever Donald's on the screen, I find myself transfixed.
52 is named after 24. That's not a joke.
Yo, it is. Like,
goodness, yes, it lines up.
It's wild when you think about how all these things are happening contemporaneously, right? Civil War is happening, and that's also a really politically charged event for Marvel. And then you have this happening concurrently, which has a major plot line that takes place in the middle. You know, Civil War, it's funny to think about Civil War being an event that happens because writers at Marvel understand that the world is really politically divided and politically charged, and they want to enact that with their comic book characters. And then think about how much worse everything was going to get in the next 20 years or so.
Lord.
Here, this is just like really bog standard, like American perspectives on Middle Eastern politics. Like it's hard to even call it out as particularly offensive because it is just what everything was doing. 24 is so much worse. Like he just does torture all the time, and like normal families are depicted as potential, you know, Islamic terrorists, terror cells, etc., etc. Here, at least, like they are going to protect a lot of other Arabs from a outside, you know, Arab terrorist. But it is like part and parcel with what culture was saying about what it meant to be from the Middle East, what it meant to live in the Middle East, what kind of dangers the people in the Middle East will run into, and the motivations of people who commit quote-unquote acts of terror in these regions.
You saying that takes me to that line that Renee has when, you know, she is rushing to, you know, the bomber that they are aware is in somewhere in the crowd, you know, that's gathered in front of Adam and Isis. And, you know, that line when she, you know, she's tortured as to whether or not she's going to take the shot when she actually spots the girl in the crowd.
We'll get there.
Okay, no, sorry. No. I want to talk about something she says and how it is meant to sort of be this profound moment, but it is sort of like the line that you hear in these kinds of stories.
Yeah. We'll put a pin in that because I definitely want to talk to you about that. But let's lead up to this moment here. We are now watching the two streams cross essentially, which is a fun little trick they do. Morrison did this a couple of times. In Seven Soldiers of Victory, where that is like a book series where explicitly none of the characters are supposed to meet except for once. But sometimes you can tell that these two characters from these two different books are in the same place at the same time. And it's always very satisfying. It feels like a little ballet dance when they can pull that off.
We get a very fun page here, kind of playing with the ridiculousness of the Shazam mythology. We got Tawny, we got Uncle Marvel, all this stuff for the real 1940s faucet heads in the audience here.
That's Uncle Marvel down in the corner that's getting those two kebabs, I assume.
Yes. Uncle Marvel, famously back in the 1940s, would dress up in a costume along with Billy and Mary, but claimed that his powers wouldn't work because he was suffering from Shazambago. I should also note that the first time Black Adam shows up in 1945, it's Uncle Dudley who defeats him when no one else can by tricking him into saying Shazam and turning back into his mortal form. And then he didn't show up again for 30 years.
I love fucking comic books so much. Comic books are so dumb. I really love the way that Black culture is adopted weird things that people say, weird things white people say in the 1950s. This is part of our lexicon now. I'm going to be talking about Shazambago for the rest of my life.
I will say, as ridiculous as it all was, like I had no idea who the talking tiger was. I was like, no, gotta look that up.
He was in the first comic I ever read. My dad gave me a Captain Marvel treasury when I was 3 years old, and Talkie Tawny was all over that, and everybody in the comic just kind of accepted that there was this talking tiger who lived among them, like it was the Muppet movie.
Fiction can be whatever you want. Everything.
Right.
Reading the events that led to him gaining his little sliver of the Captain Marvel power, I will say it did make me think to myself, well, I mean, if they're going to give it to a tiger, well, then why can't Adam just give it, you know, why can't Isis just be Isis? Like if it can just happen that way, then sure. Like the whirlwindedness of it all isn't a red flag. Maybe this is just how the Marvels get down in DC, and I have to respect their folkways.
You know, it's sort of like I recently watched, and Alex, you recently watched Twilight too, so you'll understand. It's like when Bella meets Edward, she's like, all right, this is it. I want to start the rest of our lives right now. I'm 17. I want to have sex with you and then become a vampire. And that's the only two things I want in the world.
Yeah. You got to respect the dedication. Like the end of that movie, they're dancing together at the prom, and the whole time she's like, come on. No.
She really is.
No.
Oh my God, Charles, if you haven't seen the second to last one, Breaking Dawn Part 1, They finally get married, and they have sex one time, but like Edward is such a little freak. He destroys the bedroom afterward and is so afraid of losing control and murdering her that he does. Yeah, afterward. He's like so geeked up on having sex with his wife that he freaks out. And, like,
question for you. Is Edward a virgin?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, I mean, and how old is he?
Like 200.
So, he's,
he's 170.
I think it's not exact. Like, he's turned in 1918, having just seen the movie.
Okay. You saw it more recently than me.
Yeah.
Okay, so he's not quite 100, but he is, like...
Yeah.
He's, like, been a virgin for like, a long time.
Yeah, it's just, it's just a lot of dusty buildup. And he's, he's just got to express it through...
Yeah, absolutely.
Punches.
But his wife is such a freak. Like, Bella's such a freak. There's a montage for the rest of their honeymoon where she's just following him around this villa they've rented, trying to get him to bone. And he keeps, like, running away from her.
Is it like a vampire thing? Like, we've gone to bed once and now I have a craving for it the way you crave my blood? Or is it just like, this is just writing?
No, it's because Stephenie Meyer is a Mormon. And
I was going to say, I didn't want to make assumptions about Mormon sexual desire.
Bella got pregnant the very first time ever she had sex. So they needed to leave that room to breathe, essentially. Oh, the last book should have been adapted by David Cronenberg. It goes some places.
Yeah. No, absolutely not.
Oh, man. We can't derail. We have to talk about this other wedding that's going to happen now.
They have this beautiful ceremony over the reflecting pool where just the entire population of the country is gathered under them.
These 6 panels right here are really, really beautiful. I think just the layout is really lovely. It gives you that epic sweeping feeling. I love, especially on the next page, there's still a 6-panel grid, but it's overlaid on top of a background of just a huge crowd of people, anonymous people that are watching. So you understand how enormous this scale is. It very much gives the Wedding of Superman a little bit. And that, like, the whole country is watching their people's princess, Yeah.
Once again, I hate to give it to Joe Bennett, but he's really good at illustrating just the magnitude of this crowd, the way they decorate the margins of the panels themselves. It just spills out over the edges of the comic.
Isis does give evil bitch face a lot, but I love the look. A lot. The look on her face when she's looking at Black Adam, though, it's like, I want those two to be evil together.
Yeah. They'll get it for like a second. But we'll get into that a long time from now.
Oh, man. It's a fun time. This wedding ceremony is very interesting. We are now also getting a little bit of Renee's signature torn off notebook paper narration in narration bubbles here. So you can tell that all of this that is happening with Isis and Black Adam are happening concurrently with, down in that crowd, Vic and Renee trying to stop what they now know is a suicide bombing. The actual Captain Marvel wedding ceremony, though, is fascinating.
Oh, this is not grounded in any kind of mythology, the whole 7 virtues thing, the lightning thing. This is all made up on the spot by Jeff Johns, which is fine, because we've never had to see a Captain Marvel wedding before, so he would have no material to draw from.
Yeah, it allows them to quickly elide the question of whether or not they're Muslim. We just don't know. Right. They're doing a Captain Marvel wedding.
Yeah, they're not Muslim, they're Shazamish.
It's really, really, really good. But then as this was sort of standardized, Grant Morrison, I think they said, I've said it differently like every episode. I think what they said is that 6-panel grids are television and 9-panel grids are movies. And here you can see what they mean by that. It feels very beat in these 3 pages, or in these 2 pages. And then as the panel layout turns, or as the page turns and the panel layout changes, so that the grid gets narrower and narrower, you get this sense of tension and pushing in from the sides as Renee figures out that she has really one shot to stop a monumental tragedy from occurring right here in the crowd.
And that's all Keith Giffen. So, the way he's able to really make it feel like Renee's desperation is just crowding in on her before she has to make the decision that's going to change her life
Yeah.
is just really comes through the art here and the layouts.
It absolutely. She leaps up on Vic's shoulder, then she sees someone that must be the bomber that's always already been identified to us, the audience. There was a little pull-out panel of a woman in a green cloak, but you can see that she's got a backpack and she's all covered up. It's not looking good. But as she turns her face, Renee realizes and says audibly, it's just a kid.
Yeah.
So while this wedding has happened, we moved into a big 2-page splash that I think is super beautiful. I love the background work here. I love the falling roses. It's giving the drama that you would want from an event like this. I keep imagining it as like a CW show where they, like peak CW, like Gossip Girl era. Like Blair's Wedding. You know what I mean? Anyone who's seen Blair's Wedding, please write in and tell me I'm right.
So I will get messages in the mailbag this week, 52mailbag@gmail.com. I saw Blair's Wedding. That's going to be all the messages next week.
Oh, great. Well, it gives it gives opulence in a way that media that's made for teenage girls specifically like understands. It's not even about whether or not it looks cheap. It's about the razzle dazzle. It's about fucking lightning bolts. It's about giant statues and reflective pools. It's about the wild and wacky outfit that Isis has worn this entire time and is still wearing. And I love the way that the little sort of cloth goes in between her legs, specifically as she's flying, so nobody sees her hoo-ha. It's really funny.
You brought up a comparison to Superman's wedding, but Superman's wedding was Clark Kent's wedding. We've never really had this really super visible, out-and-out superhero wedding, at least in the DC universe before.
Actually, it's more like a royal wedding. It's like Meghan Markle and what's his name? Who cares what his name is? The other one.
So much of this is clearly about the pageantry, and the pageantry isn't exactly about a show of Kandak's power by way of like, goodness, like look at the riches of the palace, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the power is literally Black Adam and Isis. And so everything about this ceremony is sort of plays into, or rather it works to sort of highlight their majesty in like a superheroic sense that works. So like it would hit me so much better if it didn't immediately just read as like, oh, well, the fall is coming, right? Like there is, this is their emotional height together as like as two people who are sort of in like a stable, happy place with one another. And for all of the beauty just telegraphs the fact that the shoe is going to fall in such a tragic way later on in the series. But in the moment, it is just sort of like, oh, I moments like this make me think to myself, could I have been a Black Adam fan in another life? Could something like this, could an Isis ongoing have been the thing that sort of like captured my imagination, with this sort of being the big entree? It's so, you see so much of the Black Adam movie or rather so much of its energy in this.
Yes.
And anything like a direct adaptation of, Black Adam's arc in 52, I don't think would have made a lot of sense for where Black Adam, the film, ended up in the DCEU. But for something like this to sort of be a more foundational moment for a cinematic franchise, you bringing up, the ways in which this issue does sort of unfold, does sort of take on a cinematic quality. I can see something like this working so well on the screen, right?
Yeah.
To sort of establish Adam and Isis as figures and Kandak as a place of genuine importance within like the world that other characters sort of like have an understanding of. But oh well.
Yes.
Well, I was going to save this for the Blackboard, but I feel like this is a more appropriate moment for it. I'm about to blow the bloody doors off here. Because this entire issue back in 2006 drew a lot of criticism from fans, not for the reason you would expect, but because we were speaking about Civil War over in Marvel. But in 2006, something else was happening at Marvel very, very recently before this. It was the courtship and wedding of Black Panther and Storm. And that was getting a ton of press. And there were a lot of people who were critical of it because they were taking basically their two Central African characters and pairing them together. And it seemed like DC was kind of following that star. And like this whole Black Adam wedding was their way of saying, oh, we need a Black Panther wedding. So this is following on the heels of another high-profile superhero wedding.
You can see so much of that in the way that Isis is brought into Adriana is brought into Kandak and sort of becomes rather close proximity-wise to Adam as she becomes Isis. She does take on a sort of like, I wouldn't go so far as to call her a knockoff Storm, but when she has these moments where she's like, wins, and they come and push things over, I did think to myself like, I mean, okay, if we must.
Yeah.
You are the wind controlling foreigner in a magical and torn asunder kingdom. Wakanda isn't always, fully stable. But here you are sort of swooping in quite literally on, winds from the north. And you are this calming, grounding presence for a misunderstood, complicated king whose position in the larger world is often, the topic of much conversation amongst his peers, enemies / colleagues, right? The parallels are very obvious.
They have a mystical heritage also that specifically positions them as the leader of this country also, which is, and it's the only real difference is that Black Adam here as being specifically reframed to now not be evil anymore, whereas Black Panther has always been heroic.
Mm-hmm. Correct. Mm-hmm. So, right as this wedding is taking place and their union is being cemented, Renee is getting up the guts to fire the shot. And we have our huge splash page kiss as thunder rains down around them, which is, I guess, how everyone misses in the commotion that a girl just died.
Yeah, it's a beautiful illustration. Again, the beautiful illustration of the crowd and the scale. The lightning bolt gives it so much majesty. And then the opposite page is a 6-panel grid that's mostly without dialogue, or with really minimal dialogue when it does appear, where Renee has collapsed to the ground. She's killed the potential bomber. She clearly feels extremely distraught over what she's done.
I feel like I'd be remiss not to point out how goofy the scripture is that they wrote for her. That she recites.
It's awful. It's straight up. Okay, so when you think about the elements of crime, what are you thinking about? Are you thinking about, let's see, what did they say? The body, the getaway, and the alibi? Is this like, are you going to talk about Tommy guns now? Yeah. Is this like a rat-a-tat-tat type situation? Like, are you Benny from Fallout New Vegas? Like, what's happening?
Yeah, they have a mass where they all put cigars in their mouths and go, mass, see?
It sounds like...
That's their Eucharist.
Yeah, I know I've read in extra material or interviews that, like, one of the regrets that Morrison had specifically was just not figuring out what the crime Bible was about or what it said. They just don't know.
Yeah, Greg Rucka was always like, I always thought we would come up with a better name than the religion of crime. But we never did.
Whoops. Sometimes the creative process leaves you with an extra piece that you don't know what to do with.
We literally just spoke to Mark Waid last week, and he was like, yeah, the Speed Force is kind of a thing I had on paper as a TBD until it came time to publish.
And now it's just there. We just say it with a straight face.
God, can you imagine if you just said something offhand and then people started saying it for the next 50 years? It would kill me.
That's comics, baby.
And if you would like to listen to our bonus episode where we interview Mark Waid, by the way, you should head over to aftermath.site/products, because if you give us a subscription, you have access to all the bonus episodes we've done, and we've done some very cool ones, including a little Mark Waid interview. Please check it out. Anyway, back to the comic. How do you do that plug?
Back to the comic.
So this is where I put a pin in it. This is where we have this conversation between the Question, Vic Sage, and Renee Montoya. And I know you mentioned earlier that this conversation, it is very much a mic drop moment where Vic tells Renee, you didn't have a choice. And Renee says, tell that to her.
There's so much visual artistry in this entire sequence, right? Reading through it earlier today, I was really struck by, you were talking about it just now, as Adam and Isis are kissing, you get that big dramatic thundercrack. And it is obviously the thing that everybody is looking up at, right? You have the superheroes flying and they've summoned magic lightning and apparently some invisible concepts are here officiating the whole thing. Yes, let's look up here. The spectacle of it all is, in this moment when we are focused on Renee, there is this way in which the focus on Renee frames everyone else's looking up at Adam and Isis as a distraction of sorts, right? Like you have sort of missed this moment of peril that you were all in, this moment of peril that, taken in context with the rest of the story, is in many ways a result of the actions of Black Adam, right? There is a way in which his moving through the world is driving the danger that Kandak is in, and his sort of approach to justice is not necessarily going to. It's difficult to articulate this idea, right? Like this is the inherent thorniness in Black Adam's heroism. In as much as he is protecting the people of Kandak, he is also endangering them, right? And there are all sorts of complex realities that the comics try to address, but also sort of gloss over in as much as they sort of make the character work as is needed for the narrative. But here, there's this way that I read Renee as sort of, you are meant to read her as the character who is understanding the true tragedy and loss that Kandak is experiencing, which is not just the death of this girl, but the fact that this girl's life had been taken away from her and she'd been turned into a suicide bomber. I can appreciate an articulation of that idea, but specifically the phrasing, oh, she's just a girl, and the way that we are meant to sort of interpret her saying that as being how to put this.
But I feel like I'm picking up on what you're putting down here.
It is. I guess what I'm trying to say is that particular phrase always reads to me like an articulation of, in this moment after which I have killed someone, I am acknowledging their humanity in such a dramatic way that is meant to make you understand, that is meant to make you sort of feel a gravity about something that just a moment ago you are very much on board with.
Yeah.
And it doesn't play for me, right? Especially in a comic like with these kinds of politics, for that to sort of be the cherry on top in Renee's dramatic moment. She's just a girl. There's so much more texture and thorniness to Renee that I feel like whatever she says in that moment should be so much more something that's not this.
Yeah, she's already, like, up to this point in Gotham Central experienced so much heartbreak and loss, and she's seen so much death, including, like, I mean, working in Gotham PD, it's pretty probable that she's already seen the death of a child or a child being indoctrinated into a cult.
But she's never had to Reginald Val Johnson somebody. She never had to go, I shot a kid.
Yeah. No, that's true. What doesn't land for me here is just the way that it, post-faction, like post the action acknowledges this character's humanity. And I don't know if it's in character for Renee to vocalize her regret in this particular way. Oftentimes her regret manifests in self-hatred and drinking and like self-abuse. But it's also that it is very much, again, like just a product of its time understanding of the personhood of people that live outside of America, where the idea of her just being a kid, it's like, how could a child become so radicalized that they'd want to do such an action against people that, you know, in another place, in this foreign land, right? Where if you actually look at the roots of conflict, you can actually suss out how people get radicalized. It's not a mystery.
Yeah.
Particular specific political actions lead to terrorist organizations being in existence and leads to the radicalization of young people who are vulnerable to manipulation.
And that is arguably the entire reason that they're in Kandak, right?
Yeah.
To sort of express that incredulity in that moment. It's like, babe, hey, you know, you're not new to this. This freshness does feel out of character in the moment. I was just looking at the page again. It does. You were just talking about sort of the ways in which the ceremony negates any necessity to address Black Adam and Isis's religion. But there is this explicit moment of Christianity as Renee is praying after she shot the girl, right? Like she does fall to her knees and she immediately, you know,
Mother Mary, full of
I
grace.
do want to point out something about that panel that I encountered in my research for this issue. She was not originally praying in that panel. You'll notice the panel afterwards. She's wiping her mouth. Originally, in the script, they had Renee Montoya vomiting in that panel. She was throwing up because she couldn't stomach the fact she just killed somebody. The editor, Stephen Wacker, thought that was a bit too much. So he's like, what if she's just on her knees praying?
I mean, I think that's a good editor's note, frankly.
Yeah.
I think the throwing up would have been too much.
It truly would have pushed it over the edge. Like has she been drinking up until this point? Like, is she
drinking in Kandak? I'm not sure.
Well,
she was drinking up until the moment she left for Kandak. That's for sure.
Maybe Tot Roeder sent a bunch of cold ones in the shipment along with her gun.
Yeah, I think maybe, let's say I'm doing an edit on this page. Here's how I would have tried to express the same emotion that doesn't quite land here. What we want is like more guilt for Renee, right? Like that's the point of her having any emotion about this at all.
Yes.
Because it's setting up the intensity of her guilt manifesting later on in the series. So her being a little girl, the only real reason that matters to Renee is because it's a moment where Renee is forced yet again to do something that crosses her own personal moral line. So what I would have had Renee say here, instead of continuing to focus on how this was another little kid, is have Renee again turn her guilt inwards and be like, I did this. I'm a kid killer now. You know?
Yeah.
I just think it's, they kind of get the expression of it backwards, where it's such a, like, again, like the particular politics of the time just don't allow for a lot of personhood of this character, when we won't really figure out what this character's motivations and the motivations of the organization they belong to are, well, ever, but hopefully, you know, we're gonna figure it out in following issues. So, but it does, like, if this is gonna lead into the religion of crime, then we don't need to spend so much time focusing on the racially, politically tinged aspects of this particular suicide bombing.
I do want to say this scene does represent the third part of a sort of triptych that Greg Rucka is building in conversation with his works to Denny O'Neill's The Question. And that every single relationship that Vic Sage has with a woman that's important to him is punctuated by that woman killing somebody. In The Question number 4, I believe, his love interest, eventually turned mayor of Hub City, Myra Furman, kills the reverend who is going to sacrifice her daughter in cold blood. And all Vic Sage says is, better you than me. And that eventually leads to a lot of turmoil between them. In Batman Huntress, Cry for Blood, which is a Greg Rucka written book edited by Denny O'Neill.
Let's just quick pause. Charles, you should read that one, because the Huntress is your girl. Like, I'm just saying, you would love the Huntress. My friend, yeah. Just a crime mafia daughter, you know?
You're not wrong. Did I watch the Birds of Prey, the short-lived Birds of Prey WB series
I
as a
knew
child?
You fucking watched that. Come on.
Of course.
Helena Bertinelli is DC's The Punisher, but cooler.
Yes.
Oh, hard agree.
Yeah, it's for the girls in the games. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Batman Huntress Cry for Blood and Ivory Madison's Huntress Year One is a really underrated comic. But yeah, that's my Huntress Rex. But yeah, in that comic, that's where the idea of the Question Huntress being in a relationship starts. But as opposed to the Justice League cartoon, it ends tragically when she decides to kill the mob boss anyway, despite Vic warning her not to.
This is why I think you should read The Huntress also.
Yeah. So that ended, whereas this one didn't because it was a necessary death, whereas the two before were both done kind of in cold blood. But
yeah.
Every single time Vic has accepted any kind of woman into his life, it was around the conversation of murder. So we're seeing that now with Renee, that Renee will do that too, but only when she absolutely has to and has no other choice. And it's something that she doesn't want to do. And that kind of answers some important questions for Vic Sage in this moment, who Renee is.
I love their arc. That's all I'll say. I don't want to spoil anything because I love their arc so much and it makes me really happy. In the next page, we get a little bit more post-wedding denouement.
It's the scene after A Whole New World in Aladdin where he drops her off at the balcony, except they actually do go inside together.
Yeah, no, that's exactly literally it. Oh my God. Like there's dialogue, but it's completely readable as just a series of images. It's all in silhouette. The light, the coloring in this issue, the lighting of that sort of backlit glow as their two faces gaze lovingly at each other. That's so, so, so beautiful. But again, and I think this is a better expression of the spectacle, the idea of this spectacle wedding distracting from a murder that occurred. The very last panel in this grid is of
I love this.
A janitor cleaning up the blood stain.
Yes. The lights are off. Everyone's gone home.
Yeah. I think that panel hits in the way that the previous page does not hit.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah. But that's the end of Conduct for this issue. We do have a couple more characters showing up right near the end.
Yeah, we have 2 pages to remind you that we haven't forgotten about this space storyline. Oh, they're still there.
Yeah, they're still freaking there. Charles, I just want to ask, before you looked up any of these characters, did you have any idea who these people were?
I mean, of course I know who Starfire is.
I knew you would say Starfire, but...
So, like, I know Starfire, and I do know Adam Strange, right?
Yes.
I'm weirdly familiar with Adam Strange.
Oh, how?
Because of the what is the recent Tom King series?
Strange Adventures.
Strange
Yes.
Adventures, right?
Another weirdly a comic book that's weirdly a lot about the war in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a wheelhouse Tom King is strong in.
He's got some personal guilt he might need to express.
He's got some internal. He's got some turmoil that he's putting on the page.
Mm-hmm.
I will say, Animal Man was new to me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Animal Man. I have grown to have more respect for classic DC characters, but as a kid, I was always like, oh, DC characters always just their names are too simple. It's just Animal Man, Animal Woman, and well, rather just like Formula Animal Man. But then to see like, oh no, we also just have Animal Man, and it's like, look, you guys, I'm familiar with Vixen. I don't know why you need an Animal Man running around doing all these animal things, and I also have no idea why he's in space with like two spacefaring characters. So. Okay, but I will say, reading this, it's been interesting. I've been calling it Space Challengers in my mind, just because of the number of memes I feel you can make out of this.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely! It does feel a little bit like Space Challengers. What I'll say about Animal Man, since you're less familiar with him, he's just like a guy. Like the whole
that's the vibe I get. He's just a guy.
No, the whole book in the 80s that Grant Morrison wrote that made this character like significant at all to the following oeuvre of DC was basically just being like, Animal Man is like a B-lister, C-lister, and what happens when he just like goes home to his wife and kid and like hangs out? Like, it mows the lawn.
Yeah, the whole point of Animal Man is that he's kind of dumb.
Yeah.
That's why Morrison was able to tell that kind of story with him.
Exactly. Nobody cared about this character. There's so many DC characters that you can just pluck one out of thin air and be like, I'm just going to write a book about this guy. Yeah,
and
exactly.
I read this as definitely like an elevating moment for his character, and I will say the moments in which the comic flashes back to his family it does make me understand like that's sort of me talking about that you have to have an emotional investment in these characters, but I will say this particular arc does such a good job of sort of immediately giving you an understanding of like, her husband is like in space, and he's Animal Man. He doesn't belong there. Of course, she's worried about him, and the kids are like, when is he coming home? And she's like, look, I'm doing laundry. I'm dealing with this as much as I can.
Absolutely. No, she's like the best character.
I kind of stand
from the original comic. I do stand her. She's incredible. These two panels are great, but again, you probably didn't pick up on this one, Charles, but in the next in 52 is like the real reason for the space heroes to show up. There's every issue, there's this little illustration of like, what's going to happen next week? And this one is just a drawing of Lobo, who is like, I fucking love Lobo.
I have seen, and the things that happen with Lobo are very interesting. It's very like, oh, this is fun. This is fun and cool. But I will say this much, to sort of have these three be the entree to a Lobo story is very clever. I think that's very, I think that's very like, it's very nice narrative meal making.
Yes, absolutely.
It's a particular treat because Keith Giffen, who's doing the breakdowns on every single issue, is the creator of Lobo. So it's these four writers kind of shoving in the artist's face like, oh, let's see what we can do to your baby.
Yeah, it gives the fan fiction-y aspect a little bit more of a forefront here. It's like you're playing with your toys in a fun way. You're taking your action figures out and you're making them kiss. And I'm always happy about that when creators get to do that.
Before we go on to the backup, I did tease earlier that this issue was Greg Rucka's greatest regret.
Please.
And I would like to reveal why. And the answer is the rat poison. Because Vic Sage and Renee Montoya discovered the rat poison 2 weeks ago. But why would they be planning a bombing of Black Adam's wedding if Black Adam hadn't even proposed to Isis until this week?
Oh my God.
This was something that the fans got extremely mad about at the time. Oh, these guys have no idea what they're doing. This makes no sense. The timeline's all off. And Greg Rucka was like, listen, guys, the proposal was supposed to happen a few weeks ago. Jeff Johns moved it up. There are a lot of moving parts. We all write our pieces kind of separately, but we talk once a week on the phone. There's some stuff that's going to fall in the cracks. And for years, Greg Rucka just kicked himself about this. Like, the rat poison clue, it doesn't work. I made a mystery that doesn't solve. And it's some bad code.
Listen, there's a murder that happens in the beginning of the Maltese Falcon, which is like the example of a noir mystery. There's a murder that happens that kicks off the whole plot. And if you read that book, you will never learn who killed that guy. It's fine. It's fine, Greg Rucka.
And that's the greatest noir of all time.
Yes. No, it's considered like the example. Like when you talk about what a noir mystery is, it's the Raymond Chandler and the Maltese Falcon. It doesn't, inciting incident is just what kicks off the plot. Like, there's a bunch of excuses you could use as a writer. I love coming up with writer excuses where characters do things. It's fun. They could have just been trying to stockpile rat poison because there's sanctions on Kondak and it's difficult to get it.
But
Easy
then
enough.
Renee figuring out that that's what the bombing was that's what the bombers were doing from that makes no sense. Why would she know they were going to bomb the wedding? She only knew that because of the rat poison that she found on the scene.
Well, she knew that the people that were trying to kill her had rat poison. We're going to get into this for a second.
Okay.
And she knew that they had it generally. They could have just been waiting for any big event.
The right opportunity.
This
was it.
Yes, and this was it. And I think you probably could have written that in to have it all make sense. But as written, I accept
you get the no prize.
that it doesn't make sense. Yes, I do get the nose prize. Thank you.
I love this backup. It's great. Mark Waid just doing what Mark Waid does best, condensing the entire history of a character to its salient points. Most of this is taken from Jeff Johns' JSA work. He very graciously weaves in some of the 90s stuff that Jerry Ordway was doing with the character of Theo Adam, which is something that's not really acknowledged anymore. But basically what we have here in these few panels is everything from the first 20 minutes of the Black Adam movie.
You're 100% correct. I actually still haven't seen that, but yeah, this is all it in the order that it would have to happen, right?
Yeah.
I love the art for this backup.
It's J.G. Jones, our cover artist.
J.G. Jones the god, really fucking killing it. I 100% just, it's again, very good at positioning these characters in such a way that you can read the entire text without even looking at the word balloons here. I think it's just brilliant. But I also really love something I've always liked about Black Adam, and stop me if this is weird, but I like that he's got a scoop neck uniform because it gives wrestling strongman, like circus strongman, in a way that you just don't see in comic books like anymore. It gives out of time is what it is.
That there's like a Sinestro-ness to his face that doesn't read as Sinestro. It reads as classic Namor, right?
Yes.
That does sort of
it is very Namor, yes.
That puts him right into that sort of imperious, villainous, anti-hero kind of space just from a visual perspective. Especially when I will say I've always been fond of like Black Adam in power poses, whether he's like charging at you as a reader or just sort of like lounging in a chair. It always, I feel like there is of all of the messiness of like Black Adam's lore, there is sort of that sort of like universal understanding of I don't want to call it like a swagger, but there's almost just kind of like there's just like a weight to Black Adam that this art in particular just like sells so well.
Yes. You can see how this would just completely melt your brain if you're Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and everyone says you look like this guy. Like, this is what The Rock wants to be, not just as a character, but as like a figure in Hollywood. Someone whose power is immediately knowable and really, really intimidating. That's what he wants to project. Unfortunately, he is a former professional wrestler. So
that iconic image you referred to of Black Adam lounging in the chair menacing is from 52. So this is literally the series that creates that image of Black Adam.
And we'll get into it in some bonus apps, but you can see so much of the current formulation of what not just the former DC Extended Universe, that was the films that have now sunsetted, but James Gunn's version of what he wants to do. Almost all of it comes from this series. Specifically everything with Black Adam, it all comes from here. And it's just really interesting. I talk about this book with people and they're like, do you mean the New 52? But this book is really essential to the backbone of how people understand how you even interact with this huge universe that goes on for so long. Like, if you don't want to get into the big three, here's a very handy way to understand the world that they live in. And if you're making an extended extra material filmic universe from that, well, here's a example of all of that functioning, maybe at the best it ever has, all together in one work.
And a lot of that has to do with the release schedule. It's the idea that this is a weekly part of your life. This is something that constantly changes. It is not a static world.
Yeah. It's it's soap opera. That's why Housewives was made such a splash as a primetime soap back in the day. Around the same time.
Around the same time, yeah.
Where it's like, you know that the drama will never end. What Ava Longoria is going to get up to, when one problem is solved, she will have another problem. Like, it's just always there's always going to be forward motion. Even when it strains credulity, like the kind of stuff you get up into, like Shonda Rhimes' shows, like there's comes to a point where it's like, why would anyone go to that hospital
or whatever?
Yeah, why would anyone go there? There's been like 3 car bombings there. Like, what's going on?
Why would anybody go to Murder University?
Yeah, exactly. But it's like the reason why, Viola Davis makes as good of an Annette, it's not Annette Bening, but Annette, Professor Murder Lady, as she does
Amanda Waller,
is because there is no ceiling to how vampy you can be in this kind of story. The universe will move to accommodate you because there always has to be raising stakes.
The essential storylines at the bottom I always like to go through. We get Orway's Power of Shazam, a great series that brought Captain Marvel back for like the modern era for the first time, really. JSA Black Rain, which is where Jeff Johns first started getting his fingers into Black Adam to try to mold him into this anti-hero figure. Villains United, which he has a very small role in. It's hard to contextualize the fact that 52 comes off the heels of Black Adam literally being one of the leaders of the Legion of Doom at the time. Like, it's him and Lex Luthor and Deathstroke and Dr. Psycho and just the most evil bastards making plans to kill all the heroes. And Black Adam kind of backs away from that at the beginning of this story. That like, I was just protecting my country, doing what I had to do. But right after that, we have 52 where he's making this hard pivot back to what Jeff was doing in Black Rain. And I would put it up to like writer contention, but Jeff Johns was doing all of that. Jeff Johns was Infinite Crisis. So I'm not sure why he had Black Adam in that role at that point, other than just the general idea of increasing his visibility by making him part of a major event, and not really having a better place to put him. But it does seem counteractive to the arc he was putting him on at the time. It's something I don't 100% understand. Maybe it's where the idea of him
feels like it's gotta be character visibility. It's a little bit like after Firefly got canceled and all of the Firefly actors ended up in Dollhouse, like
yes.
you want to make sure that people remember who these characters are. And prior to Infinite Crisis, prior to 52, Black Adam was more obscure. Like, this is the thing. Like, we make a lot of jokes about The Rock having his brain melted by this comic, but this is the thing that brought this character to prominence for a lot of comic book readers and made, like, major nerds. If you're not a big Shazam nerd and, like, for reasons previously discussed on this episode, there are many reasons one might not be a big fan of Captain Marvel, even though I'm a ride or die for Very Marvel. It makes a lot of sense that if you thought maybe I got something cooking for this one character that's slightly obscure, if you're a Jeff Johns type, you might think, I want to stake my claim now and start writing this character, even though I know that the arc I want them to go through is a little bit different from what's happening.
It's calling dibs is what it is. Exactly.
Calling dibs. Yeah.
Yeah. Politics.
Absolutely.
What was your favorite scene in this issue?
God, my favorite scene. It's one of the wedding scenes. I think it's the big kiss. I think it is, because I'm just a little romantic at heart for me. I just love the wedding in general. And I like when I know that this is like gonna be looked back and I'm gonna feel sadness, but I love that high, that mythological high, that the tone that they actually make you feel about this, even though it's only been like 4 weeks, even though there's a murder going on in the background. It's like I didn't watch the royal wedding live, but I did wake up and watch highlights on YouTube. Like, I like pageantry. I'm sorry, I just can't help it.
Yeah, in a regular series, 4 weeks is the time span between one issue and the next issue. So it kind of puts that pace in perspective.
It sure does.
Charles, did you have a scene in this issue you particularly liked?
I did, actually. I actually love the specific moment when Adam gives Isis the diamond and proposes to her. Of the things that I really sort of love about the two of them as just like a couple in love, throughout this series up until this point, there are so many moments where Adam articulates not just, his sense of loneliness because of his loss of a family, of his first family, but this sense that he is fundamentally alone because of his power and position in society, right? And he says to Billy, like, I saw you build your marble family. And I thought to myself, like, why isn't that something that I can do for myself? It's so easy to imagine his saying to Billy, I want to build my own marble family. And for that building to sort of have a sinister undertone to it through the whole process. But through his courtship of Isis, there are a handful of moments where he says things that are, I forget what his exact phrasing is, but when he's first convincing Adriana to become Isis, he's like, no, like, you will have the power of a goddess. Like, you'll be stronger than I am. And I want you to have that. And I want you to be in my life as that kind of presence, right? Which is, as a 33-year-old now, I recognize that as like a bit of a red flag, some fuckboy shit kind of shit, that you should, it's very sweet in the moment, but understand that it's probably a trap. But I do, as a sap for that kind of stuff. I love it. I love that coming specifically from Black Adam. I have a soft spot for villains with old loves, and that old love to manifest itself anew with all of this sort of tradition of it. Not tradition, but this sort of, this is what my love looks like. It is a true kind of devotion to you. What do you think about that? Not, I'm going to force it upon you, but here's my presentation of it. And it does just sort of it feels very true and accurate to Black Adam for this to be such a sort of new and potentially risky kind of new twist to his lore. This feels very much like, of course, this is how he would do it, right? I really love it.
For me, I mean, based on the fact that we spent like 20 minutes talking about it, it's that one page where Renee is just living in the aftermath of having killed that girl. Because as I've expressed a couple times, my journey through comics was I went from Justice League Unlimited to this book, and then I went through Vic Sage's entire bibliography before this. And only in revisiting 52 did I see how richly Greg Rucka lays the elements of his character through his entire history going back to 1967 for each beat in this story. And like seeing the way that Vic reacts to Renee's moment of trauma here feels like it was put there just for the weird freaks who think the Question is a more interesting guy than Batman. It's like, yeah, this is where we see those stories paying off. This is where we see how this is affecting him and how it's informing his decisions here and reassuring him on the path that he's taking with Renee to where it will ultimately go. And it meant a lot to me specifically as a longtime comic reader now.
It's so cool that Rekka actually gets to have these moments pay off. Like, that is incredibly rare in comics. I can't think of many other examples where someone's been working on a character for a lot of their professional career and is actually able to have a setup and a payoff, right? Like, even in the current run of X-Men and Krakoa, like, Homie had a bunch of ideas, and then Marvel saw that the books were selling so well that they actually wanted to extend the Krakoan era longer than the arc would have allowed for. And now we are drawing to a close, and I am not up to date on the Krakoan era, but like, corporate interests so frequently get in the way from actual storytelling. So having this pay off for someone like Alex Jaffe, let's say, who has collected every single Vic Sage action figure that's noticeable behind him.
That's me.
This is like remarkable. I mean, for a Renee Montoya head, right? Like, for me, reading this book, just having this character become transformed through it. There's so much cathartic release because Renee has been through so much before this comic book series. So it's similar, but on a much shorter scale.
Okay. I think with that, it's time to go to the Blackboard. What do you think?
I think it's time for the Blackboard. And I know you've already explained, Alex, that it doesn't have any root in any mythology, but I really wish I knew more about the specific to the Captain Marvel family wedding ceremony.
Yeah. It obviously doesn't come up a lot because Billy is perpetually a child, so he doesn't get a lot of love interests.
That would be weird. It would just be a little bit weird, unless you're... No, there's no way. Sorry.
Later in JSA, Jeff Johns tries to start a thing going between Billy and Stargirl, but that's very controversial, and it's not really a thing anyone talks about anymore.
Yeah, because Stargirl does not have an adult human form that she can just turn into at will. She's a teenage girl.
Doesn't work.
It's a little weird. Like, why do they have a wedding ceremony that's specific to them only? I'm not going to say it's not cool. I think that probably Black Adam would have done this anyway, but...
I think they made it up just for this. Billy spent the whole week
I think it's just like, hey,
I gotta make up a wedding ceremony.
This never happens. And of course, I feel like the gods are like, oh, well, love is one of our things. Of course we'll show up for your nonsense, you mortal avatars of us. How lovely for you. We won't manifest or anything. We'll do lights for you, I suppose. That'll be our gift.
Give them a little razzle-dazzle.
You're both interesting people who have led interesting lives. Have either of you ever conducted a wedding ceremony?
I have not conducted a wedding ceremony. Charles, I think you'd be great at it if you were ever...
I'd be very down to do it, but I think that everyone understands that if you ask me to officiate your wedding, you have to have no doubt as to whether or not you want to get married. Because I will look directly into your eyes and be like, why are you wasting my time?
Yeah, no, that's why I think you'd be great at it.
I have officiated one wedding.
Oh my God, that's really cool.
How was it?
It was great. It was two people who were regulars when I hosted a trivia night at a bar for 2 years. They asked me to do the wedding as well. So I worked with them on creating kind of like an original ceremony for them. And just like I wrote a speech, I wove in all the cultural stuff they wanted to do. And it was kind of like we collaborated in making up what the wedding was together. And I feel like that's kind of what's happening with Billy here.
That does sound like Mary and Captain Marvel Jr. and Billy all showed up in Conduct that morning, and they were like, okay, let's sit down. What's important to you guys? What do you want to make sure that people know about your love?
And they wrote down lightning first, and they're like, yes, lightning, lightning.
Obviously, lightning, yes. Yeah.
Obviously, you want to make out over the reflecting pool. Why else have a reflecting pool?
We can fly and see ourselves in it. So number one, that's the location.
Yeah, I think the reason Mary was on board for being maid of honor is that she got to plan this wedding, and she was very excited about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If you have unlimited budget and anything you want to have happen could happen, if I was 16, I would plan a wedding in a heartbeat. It would have been the tackiest wedding of all time, but I would have done it.
The bride can summon breezes to blow her magically manifested flowers indefinitely in the sky. Yeah, we're going all out with the theatrics.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, you better believe.
For me, I blew the things I wanted to talk about in the Blackboard already. I wanted to talk a little bit about women who have killed in front of Vic before. I wanted to talk a little bit about the Black Panther connection, but what I'm going to use this Blackboard segment for this week is to offer a correction. Because a few weeks ago, we were talking about a scene where Ralph Dibny shows up in Opal City to open up his storage locker, and we all made a lot of good jokes about why Elongated Man would be in Opal City of all places and how it was kind of picked out of a hat. When a listener, I will acknowledge that they corrected me, but I will not acknowledge their name. That is the compromise I'm making. You get to be right, but you don't get to be named. Reminded me that for 20 whole issues of James Robinson's Starman, Ralph and Sue Dibny had moved into Opal City and were kind of hanging out with Jack Knight at the time. That was later in the run, like between issues 60 and 80. It's been a while since I read those. It slipped my mind. I am but a mortal man. Some things escape even me in the moment as we are recording a live podcast.
I'm going to call Mark about this. Sorry.
I should have done the research, and I am offering a sincere apology that I forgot that Ralph lived in Opal City for a while. Should have brought it up on that episode. I did not. There we go.
Well, I forgive you if that's...
Thank you, Gita. It's been weighing on.
Did you have a moment for the Blackboard, or should we move on to the mailbag?
I have always really, really, really wished that each of the lanterns, each kind of lantern that exists on the lantern spectrum. I wish that
Also a
they
Jeff Johns concept.
I wish that they all had silly weaknesses, the way that some green lanterns are occasionally weak to yellow objects. I wish each of them had a nonsense weakness that doesn't get used all the time, right? But it is just like, this is a thing that we all have. For you, it's I want purple lanterns to be, or indigo lanterns to, be deathly afraid of, I don't know, blue things, for whatever reason. I forget where they're not. I forget where they're not.
The hope-based lanterns, they can't listen to emo music because it just
right.
them.
I almost, I like that even better. Like, I don't want it to be a color-based thing. I feel like a nonsensical weakness should be a fundamental part of one's relationship to a power ring in the DC comics. That to me seems right.
I completely agree. Thank you.
Jeff, to set up a timeline there, Jeff is the one who got rid of the yellow weakness and then a couple years later started introducing the color lanterns. So there's no real overlap between it. So like his compromise was, I'll get rid of the yellow weakness, but I'll introduce the yellow lantern. So that'll be a way of updating the concept. And from the yellow lanterns, the whole spectrum of lanterns came.
I wish sometimes that the lantern color spectrum was also more like horoscopes.
Yeah.
like you could be a green rising with a yellow sun and an indigo moon,
Yeah.
Like I feel
For a
like
while, Guy Gardner was rocking a green ring and a red ring, and Jon Stewart liked to call him the Christmas lantern.
I kind of love, but question for you, how does that work exactly? What is that? Wait, that's
willpower and rage.
Rage.
Rage,
gotcha.
Yes.
Yellow is fear.
Yeah.
you got a lot of shit to do and you're fucking mad about it.
Exactly.
I can see them being sympathetic. Yeah.
I understand that. Yeah, no, I those are the kinds of things I always wish we just could spend days upon days just digging into, like the cosmology of these certain things. Like similar to, is Billy Batson an adult man or a child? Just what? We don't know.
I have a question for you, Alex. Is there a character in DC that has like a long-standing beef with the fact that no one knows whether or not Billy is a child or an adult? Like, is there a Deadpool-like figure who's like, we just let this child here all the time, and we know that at some point, this is going to become an issue for us?
Great question. The answer to that is Superman. In Judd Winnick's great comic, Superman Shazam First Thunder, the first thing Superman does when he finds out Billy Batson is a child is he storms up to the wizard and goes, "What the hell are you thinking? This is completely irresponsible."
I love that.
It's like, listen, I was a superpowered child.
Yeah. So
I didn't have a choice about that.
Superman is very protective of Billy. He's not going to tell him he can't be a superhero, but he's like, leave him alone. He's a kid.
Noted magic lover Superman rolling up on a wizard to, scare him over, potentially abusing a child is very good.
No, that's so in character for Clark.
No one has ever accused Superman of being a coward.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You can just imagine, I feel like in Marvel, Spider-Man often takes on this position, especially post-Miles, right? Of being like, hey, I'm like 35 and I know a thing or two. Let me talk to you. Let's show you the ropes a little bit,
Yeah.
I love just that because Superman's the big, like, blue Boy Scout. He just is a Boy Scout. It's like a human being. He can't help himself. He's a golden retriever. He finds out someone he thought was an adult man is actually like maybe 15 years old at best. And he's like, I gotta talk to the management.
Yeah.
I do love the idea that like Billy Batson's true identity truly just like shocks and dismays Clark. Like, oh my God.
He can't believe it. He's horrified. It's a great comic. Judd Winnick rules.
Yeah. No, Judd Winnick does rule.
Let's go to asking the questions, shall we? This is where we have our listeners ask us questions, much like that great one that Charles just had for us, by writing into 52mailbag@gmail.com. I pulled 3 for us this week. This first one comes from Joe, who says, I'm loving the show. I've been into DC since my uncle gave me my first graphic novel, The Death of Superman. I'm a big podcast listener and DC Comics reader, but it never occurred to me to seek out comics-related podcasts until I heard Gita on Kinda Funny. Since finding the show, I've been putting more effort into getting through my endless comic backlog, and I've been looking at those issues with a new, more critical eye. Thanks for what you do. Are there any other DC or comic-related podcasts you would recommend?
So for me, I don't listen to a lot of podcasts about analyzing media, so I'm going to just give my stock recommendation, which is the podcast that really inspired me to like bring this up to Alex and start planning this, which was they do talk about comics on this show because of the nature of it. And it's Just King Things from Range Touch, which is Cameron Cusselman and Michael Lutz. I've mentioned it dozens of times. I'm sure they read all of Stephen King's books in publication order, including the really obscure ones like comic book adaptations of things that he's already written. Or there's a calendar at one point they do. Stephen King was conscripted by a calendar company to just write a whole bunch of like little blurbs about werewolves for a calendar. And the idea was that through the 12 months of the year, a story would unfold. And it's the cocaine years. You can tell for sure he's on some stuff.
Very 52.
I think those are really two really smart critics. And while it's not necessarily a comic book focused podcast, there is good critical analysis of how comic books work. And randomly in a couple of different episodes, I believe Cameron just starts talking about 52. Because he's a super fan of it too. If you want to count webcomics, Range Touch also has a podcast about Homestuck, which is truly incredible.
I would count that, yes.
Yes, it is now completely finished. And if you were like me and you started reading Homestuck because you were on Tumblr and you were like, what are those weird sprite things that are always on my dashboard? It will help you understand what the fuck happened in that comic. I just stopped reading it at a certain point. I just had no idea what was happening anymore. But it's also like what we're doing, a really good look back at a particular time range of creation and like independent media and comics as expression, and how the internet like made that more possible for people, as well as an understanding of how fandom operated with in the age of the newness of internet fandom, especially for creators that say don't have the protection of a network or a studio to keep them from talking to the fans too much. Those are really, really great shows. The Homestuck show, it's wild. It's just, there's a lot of things you'll learn about what Homestuck was. Highly recommended.
I have something to recommend here, which is something I don't think I've ever told Gita about before. But when they were telling me about Just King Things as the inspiration for this podcast, I had another podcast in mind that I drew a lot of inspiration from when crafting my part of it, which was this Canadian podcast from 2016 called The Dreaming, which was this lovely show by this very pleasant couple, Joe Fulgham and Sasha Smolders, where every issue they would go extremely in depth into one issue of The Sandman, explaining everything that was going on. And one of them knew everything about comics, and one of them knew everything about like the world and shit. And it's like, well, that's what we've got. We can do this. Unfortunately, for reasons I'm not 100% sure of, they never covered the entire series. It ends like around issue 66 or 68 or so, but that's most of it. They're only missing the last few. And just for a really in-depth look at the first 8.5 volumes of Sandman, I would really recommend that. Of course, I have to recommend Dr. DC. Having had the Doctor on a previous episode of this podcast, every week they answer questions about the breadth and depth of the DC universe. They've won a bunch of Canadian podcasting awards. I also want to recommend Gotham Outsiders, the first comic book podcast I was on as a regular guest for a while, which was sort of a queer Batman book club, which analyzed kind of the themes of Gotham City and the characters within it from LGBTQ perspectives. And I was on there to talk about how fandom has transformed the character of Tim Drake. And I showed up on a few episodes afterwards. I'm still good friends with those people. And the podcast is on a little bit of a hiatus now, but the stuff's still good if you go back to it. And I hope they start up again soon.
I would love to take a listen to that last one. That sounds fucking great. I think Batman is a particularly fertile ground for queer readings of the characters.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Charles, do you have any comic book media or podcasts that you enjoy?
Do you just have a podcast that you enjoy? Because I'll take that
I will
too.
say I don't really listen. My main engagement with comic books these days is just reading comics.
Hell yeah.
I
Girl say.
Years after years of working as a comics journalist really kind of burned me out on comics discourse and discussion.
So real.
And I love it, right? I will overhear it, I will oversee it. And I think to myself, I love that for you, but it feels too much like work.
Yeah.
It still gives me work
Yeah,
PTSD.
no, it's why I have a hard time guesting on video game related podcasts, because it's just like, I'm already just thinking and talking about this. I don't want to do it again. That's why this podcast is about comic books.
Right.
Yeah.
Frankly, yeah.
Yeah.
I have been spending a lot of time just sort of rediscovering my love of comic books as something that I just engage with in my free time with no expectation that there's going to be content created on the other end of it. But I will say shifting back into a fan consuming space when it comes to comics. I'm still writing my comics on the side, but I like to spend my time just like, what are the kids doing these days? When it comes to podcasts, I have found myself really enjoying listening to Nicole Byer and Lauren Lapkus's podcast, Newcomers.
Oh, Newcomers.
Yeah.
I love Nicole Byer.
Because I just, as a self-professed professional nerd, I am so wholly pro the idea of people just sitting down to read or watch or engage with something that they have no familiarity with just for the sake of the discovery of it, right? Like, Gita, when you reached out to me about this podcast, before I responded to you, my initial reflexive response was hiss, 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 boo, boo, boo. You're going to make me, you're going to go make me read about DC Comics. But it has been like fun. And I will say, as much as I try to steer away from like very intense fan conversations, I do really enjoy speaking with casual fans and just being like, what is your genuine read on this outside of, well, here's the hypey discussion that I want to participate in. Like, what is it that you're actually getting out of this thing, particularly years removed from its, peak popularity? I feel like those are the kinds of conversations that we should all be having with our friends more often.
Yeah.
I agree. I definitely agree.
Not just like, what have you just seen, but like, what's the thing that you've been what is the pop cultural consumption project that you've been doing as of late, and how is it speaking to you? I love that as like a framework for conversation, and I love hearing other people do it. So
what you're saying is your favorite comic book podcast is actually 52 Pickup?
That's what I'm hearing.
Oh my gosh. You caught me.
Can I make a really nerdy confession about Newcomers that I'm a little ashamed of?
Okay, we'll allow it.
I had to stop listening to the show because I got so mad that they didn't like Batman Mask of the Phantasm. And that's like my special favorite. I'm like, oh man, you guys don't get it.
You're one of those men. You're one of those men who's always
I'm one of those men. I am one of those men. It's
to keep it to yourself, though. You just stopped listening to the podcast. You didn't send an email. See, this is what you want.
No, I did not contact them. It's not their problem. It's my problem.
Exactly. If you're listening to this podcast and you've ever been tempted to I just looked in my other folder in my Twitter DMs because I was trying to not do work that I was supposed to be doing that I'm going to complete as soon as we stop recording. And someone emailed me or sent me a DM years ago that ended up in my not just the message requests, but the filtered message request folders. That was like, I love you on Waypoint, but you sniff into the mic too much and it sets off my own audio processing problems. And it's like, that's a you problem. Don't tell me to take allergy pills. There's a lot of pollen out there.
Oh, and also shout out to Esper, our amazing editor who takes out all of those sniffs and coughs when we do them.
Oh my God, Esper. Thank you so much. It's allergy season. I am so grateful to you. Esper is wonderful. And if you want to enable us to continue paying for wonderful production, please absolutely go to aftermath.site/products and consider subscribing.
Our next message comes from Anna, who talked about being surprised going into Batman comics for the first time from being exposed to him from outside media, that he doesn't kill people in the comics because he kills people in the movies all the time. So it just kind of blew her mind, this thing that everyone took for granted about Batman, just going into the source material from this other angle. So she asks, what are the wildest misconceptions you had about a character? Comics not meant to be surprising, which blew your mind when you read them.
Let's see. So this is kind of a weird one. And it's not DC related, it's actually Marvel related. But because most of my Marvel comics consumption came from fandom and fandom spaces like Scans Daily and other places where fans talk about comic books, I had this impression of Iron Man and Captain America as being like 1000% gayer than they actually are.
Oh.
Yeah.
in the books. You know, like there were the only things that ever got posted to Scans Daily from Iron Man and Captain America comics were interactions between the two of them that were slightly homoerotic. There's one specific panel I'm thinking of. I think it might be in the original run of Young Avengers where Iron Man shows up with Captain America, and because Captain America can't fly, he's just sort of like holding him around the hip. And like lifting him that way, which is just a really homosexual way to hold somebody. And then you read those books, and even in Civil War, where there is like a lot of tension and ideological posturing, et cetera, those are two incredibly straight, like heterosexual characters. They could not, to me, at least in relationship to each other. We can talk about Cap and Bucky if you want, but just the way that character relationship was sold to me as something that had the potential for homoeroticism and then just didn't really show up on the page was really shocking to me.
I think a big one for a lot of people is the entire character of Wonder Woman, where she's very much portrayed as this like warrior Princess Xena character in Justice League and other media, whereas she's kind of like a figure, a champion of peace first and foremost in the comics, which is something that writers like Greg Rucka really emphasize. And you get this kind of push and pull, especially in the past 20 years, between people who were influenced by those outside sources of like Wonder Woman has to be a badass warrior sort of thing. And just like the stuff that Marston was doing with her way back in the 40s. I mean, a big one for me personally was, why don't the question got no face? Is there a curse on him or something? And eventually I found out, oh, it's just a mask. That's pretty cool. He does it to freak people out. And
I love
that was a good thing.
I do like that that's canonically why he does it, just to be like, ooga booga.
It's scary. Funny. It's why Batman puts on bat ears to scare people. But what would scare you more? A guy dressed like a bat or a guy who literally has no face?
If I saw a normal man with no face, I would do whatever he told me to do.
This is so why scared. The kids are so obsessed with Slender Man. That's the
true.
question.
That's true. That's 100. He is. I would love like a modern take on the question, and it starts out, you know, where Renee, or let's say it's like the setup is Renee is investigating the question or whatever. We're in a movie. It's a different universe. We get to have a new origin. And it starts off with investigating a creepypasta about a guy with no face. That would be perfect. And it turns out to just
be a guy. Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Oh,
it's like, man, I think it's funny. I wrote the creepypasta wiki entry on me.
Oh, man.
Did you have a intense character misconceptualization?
As you guys were, I was struggling to remember one, but it literally just came to me a second ago. I know some things about DC quite well, and there's others that just truly just washes right over me. But I will say, the Birds of Prey TV show was a big deal for me, right? And then when I did do, my due diligence, it'd be like, well, what's this Huntress all about? To learn that Helena Bertinelli was not Bruce Wayne's daughter, I was like, well, I don't want it. What do you mean she's not a metahuman? And to learn that Black Canary's powers were not telekinesis and precognition, but a sonic scream, I'm like, that makes more sense, but it's not.
That's not my Dinah Lance.
It's not what I was introduced to, so I'm just going to have to set this aside.
Yeah. No, and it's really funny for me because those characters in particular are ones that you would like. Like their transition from book to screen, attitude-wise, personality-wise, absolutely in your wheelhouse.
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
It's just that they change the cosmology totally so that they might as well be different characters because they have other kinds of angst to go through, essentially.
One thing I do want to say while we are on the topic of the Birds of Prey TV show, Mia Sara, incredibly underrated Harley Quinn. She is amazing in this series. It's just
we
this
love
like
Harley with a
malevolent presence. She's great.
We do love that. That's one of the things I do love. I think the Birds of Prey TV show, it's like it's a precursor to like Legends of Tomorrow, where Legends of Tomorrow, they understand the joke more, but it's like it loves being over the top and silly and campy, and it got a bad rap all it was on. I remember reading those Television Without Pity reviews of the Birds of Prey show, and they were like having a party when it got canceled, et cetera, et cetera. But compared to how dour things could and would get in the DC universe's visual, like filmic universe, I would take Birds of Prey any day. They got like the basic character relationships correct. And that is something you wouldn't get from the Chris Nolan Batman movies, for instance.
Yeah.
I don't remember. Oh, it was because my husband and I are really stoned and we started just doing the Bane voice to each other, and then we decided to watch
the fire rises, Mr. Wade.
It's just really, like, why did they let him do that?
Yeah.
And then you get to a scene with like Joseph Gordon-Levitt in it, and then you remember that he's supposed to be spiritually Robin, and it's like, just let him be a Robin. Don't have his first name be Robin. Birds of Prey is so much more accurate to the text in that regard.
I don't know how this started, but I used to do this bit I called Cardi Bane.
Where I would go, I don't dance, Mr. Wade. I make money moves.
Mr. Wade, this pussy's tight like a nun.
Bring a bucket and a mop, Mr. Wade.
Juices on the floor, but yes, yeah.
I'm gonna walk out this room and start doing this to my husband who has no idea what's going on right now. Just recite all of WAP just to him.
Last one. I know this one is going to be up your alley, from Evan. I've recently started watching Smallville with my partner for the first time, and we're both fully on the Klex train. There's so much crazy energy and chemistry between the two that it drives us wild. But it also has me wondering, other than Gita's much beloved blue and gold, what are some other notable MLM or WLW ships that DC should make canon?
I mean, it's just canon to me, right? Blue and gold is canon to me, and you can't tell me it's not canon. Yeah. I will fight you because it is. They have some kind of a love for each other that's more than platonic, and I will die on that. Or at least I feel that Booster does. I don't know that Ted got enough time to interrogate his own feelings about that.
They are two men who believe they are straight who have sex with each other.
Exactly. It's like, oh, everybody jerks off their best friend, right? That's the relationship they have. I think I do love our good boy Connor Kent, Superboy, the OG clone version. I do love his canonical heterosexual love interest in Wonder Girl, but you can't tell me that when they were teenagers that Tim and Connor were not crushing on each other a little bit. I don't know if I need that to be expressed as like the relationship is consummated and they like are a couple, but I would love to have it acknowledged now that Tim is queer to be like, I was sort of crushing on Connor when we were like both in Young Justice together.
That part is canon. That part actually, Megan Fitzmartin wrote in like, yeah, he was crushing on Connor, but we don't have the other half.
I want the other half too, though. Yeah. I do. I really do like a queer misconnection and like, or any kind of, I used to like you when I was a teenager and now I'm a different person, is a very fertile ground for drama and tension. And I would love to see that on the page.
Realizing years later, damn it, that was a date, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I had that moment so many times.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a really obscure one. I think the greatest love story never told in DC Comics is Light Ray and Orion, two of Jack Kirby's New Gods characters. Oh. I think there's a real Achilles and Patroclus thing going on between them. Just like brothers in battle who can't express their feelings for each other despite meaning everything to each other because they have this war to fight, and in peace times, which they can never know, that would be the only time they would have the ability to like express how they feel to each other. And it's very much kind of subtext in everything you read with them, but just not really ever confronted at face value. Tom King kind of comes close in a couple points in Mr. Miracle, just like the amount of devotion you see Light Ray has to Orion, even when he's at his worst, that like he's clearly his entire world. And there's just this strong longing between these two godlike figures who are not meant to know love. That's really, really, it's got the sauce for me.
Yeah. No, I feel that. When you mentioned Achilles and Patroclus, I picked up what you were putting down.
Yeah. What's your ship in history, Charles?
I see you deep in thought.
I'm sitting here like, who likes each other? Who even hangs out with one another? I'm really struggling to
One of the interesting things about the Justice League is that they aren't even friends. It's like they're coworkers.
That's the thing. They're not like that, right? They're not.
Yeah.
They are very much professionals who come when they come together. It is very much like business. Like the world is in danger.
I mean, Bruce Wayne, Batman keeps a burn book on all of them, basically, right?
Right. And it's like, no, it's not. He's not drawing hearts in there. It's murder plans. It's always murder plans.
He is.
Oh yeah. I mean, speaking of belonging, like with Batman, the one I really love is the Batman Harvey Dent connection, where like you can see they clearly care about each other, and like the man he has this connection with is just halfway obscured by this demon, and he's always just kind of just barely out of reach, and just like he won't give up on him, and he keeps hoping that he'll make a recovery. It's got that forbidden longing thing for me too.
It's got the juice.
That's another good one for Batman.
It's got the juice.
I'm pretty sure it's just because of the show's very strong shoujo vibes.
Yeah.
There's nothing textual about it that necessarily speaks to it. But when I do see the key art of My Adventures with Superman, I think to myself, yes, Lois, I know it's you. I know it's you. Yes, move. But Jimmy, what's on you? What are you thinking about? What is on your mind when you're hanging out with Clark?
Oh, that's a thruple for sure.
You know,
you want to talk challengers? That's challengers.
Oh, that is.
That's challengers.
Wait, somebody, if you find a fan cam set to the Challenger soundtrack with My Adventures with Superman, please send it our way. That makes so much sense to me. Because Jimmy is Superman's pal. And
he's his pal, but so much of the series is about, Clark's ability to be such an inspirational presence in Lois and Jimmy's lives. And we see so much of that inspiration just being reflected in their ability to sort of act on, their journalistic instincts and chasing down a story. But I feel like there's also so much room for the series to be like, well, what is Clark waking up within you? Right? We see so much of that with Lois. Like she's textually falling in love, but like, this particular iteration of Clark seems very much like the kind of young man who would cause other young queer men to have sexual awakenings about themselves and be like, oh, I think I'm in love with this man a little bit.
Just like the betrayal that like he knew that Clark was Superman, but he wouldn't tell him. And he was just like kind of waiting all that time for him to come out with it.
Yeah.
There's a lot there.
There is definitely a lot there. I'm going to check the AO3 tag for that shit. That sounds pretty good. Like, that's a very juicy also just because this version of Jimmy is such an obsessive nerd. And like just such a gentle soul. Jimmy also becomes kind of a cipher in that his main characterization is, I'm Superman's friend. But here it's like we took that idea and we like really did think about the kind of human being who would be Clark Kent's best friend and accept him so totally. Yeah. Even when he knows his friend is keeping a secret from him and he wants to be led into that inner world. And there is really delicious tension in that. So they should kiss.
By the time people hear this episode, season 2 will be underway. It's starting this weekend.
Oh my God, I forgot. I can't fucking wait. I really like that show.
I'm very, very excited. Yeah. Charles, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a fantastic
episode. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. This was so much fun.
Do you have anything you would like to tell our listeners about? Somewhere to direct them to check out more of your thoughts and feelings and creative output?
Of course. In my, when I'm not busy reading comics, I am a film and TV reporter, a pop culture critic over at The Verge, where you can read all of my reviews and news and all that nonsense. I refuse to call it by whatever its name is now, but I'm still on Twitter.
We're still there.
Shouting into the void.
They got DMs on Blue Sky now, man. You know that?
I do, but it's like,
the black people aren't there. That's it.
Yeah. It really is.
I had to go back to Twitter when the Kendrick beef was happening because it was just like, that's where the people are.
I get it.
You see it.
I get
it.
Yeah, it's a unique community that
this whole being a trailblazer in online spaces is overrated. I spent my years doing the down in the trenches stuff, and I'm an old man now. So
I get you.
No, thank you.
I will say though, when I started posting about the Kendrick Drake stuff on Blue Sky, I found so many other black people that wanted community. So I recommend that for that reason, because there's a lot of like weird gamer comic book programmer types that are like, where are all the niggas at? You gotta let them know.
Just wop into the void.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yes.
thank you again for joining us. You're just wonderful, and I'm really happy to see you.
You're wonderful.
But Alex, I do actually have a question for you to end the show.
Yeah,
with.
what is it?
Are you ready?
Am I ready, Mr. Wayne? My readiness rises, Mr. Wayne. All right.
Oh boy!
Cute is not enough for me, Mr. Wayne.
52 Pickup is an Aftermath production created by Gita Jackson and Alex Jaffe and edited by Esper Quim with original music by John Ahrens. The views and opinions expressed on this show are solely those of the show's personalities and do not reflect those of DC Entertainment or Warner Brothers. Please rate and review our show wherever you can and send your questions and comments to 52mailbag@gmail.com. Never stop reading comics.